Well, good morning, everybody. Friday, the 27th of September. It's extremely rainy where I am in East Herts. Hopefully, it's better weather with you guys. Episode 97. Wow, we're going to do 100 in January. Can't get there. And today's themes, growth. Growth is a really interesting one because it's not just one that is important to managing partners. It's also one that's very important to government, as you, I'm sure, are aware. So we're going to explore that, and hopefully we'll get some thoughts on that from John shortly. Innovation, because at the end of the day, if we don't innovate, we die, somebody once memorably wrote. And today, we're going to be looking at communications in a bit more depth, and particularly some of the value key propositions that you might be seeking to uh, communicate. So this is me. Welcome very much again. I'm Richard Chaplin and Managing Partners Forum Chief Exec, and I'm delighted to be your host on, as I said, the 97th episode. Before I introduce the speakers, what I'll do is just do a quick run round and introduce the panel. I'll give you a little bit of forum news, if you like, and then having done that, we will how shall I put it? We will get into some really interesting conversations, which we hopefully you'll be wanting to stay with us and talk about afterwards. So the first person I'd like to introduce, Nigel. Good morning. Welcome to the show. Nigel is the Chief Executive of Accountants Crowe UK, who's been in that interesting role for 8 years. He also has, as you may have seen on the intro below, a global role too. So he has that broader perspective, which is really great. So Nigel, we will be obviously looking forward to your contribution. For those who haven't been on the show before, Nigel and I kind of share the questions during the panel session, and he will be introducing our next guest who, well, I'm not sure if I call you a guest, John, to be honest, because John's a regular. John comes on every time. The show wouldn't be what it was without John's incredibly perceptive insight as to what's going on in the consulting world. He shakes his head, but it's absolutely true.
Making me blush, Richard.
Oh, it's all good. I wouldn't say it if it wasn't true, because sincerity is the key, and if you can fake that, you've got it made, as Groucho Marx said. So, welcome, John. And then after John has given us his insight, welcoming in fact, a slight change, because usually up to now, it's me that does all these surveys, but because we do a lot, as you know, within the Managing Partners Forum, but I thought it'd be really nice to hear from another person who does an excellent survey, and this is Ingrid Brown. She's the principal at Brand and Communications Consultancy, Brightspace, and they did a really interesting survey a little bit earlier in the year looking at value propositions and what are the key issues you might want to focus on and who are those key stakeholders. So Ingrid, we will look forward to what you have to say shortly. And then when we come to the panel session itself, which will be in about 20 minutes or so, the person who will be joining us is Tim Nash. Welcome, Tim. Tim is the Chief Executive at law firm Edwin Co. He says he's been doing that job for 16 years. So that's getting into Nigel Knowles territory almost, isn't it? I mean, brilliant, excellent, or Neville Eisenberger, one of the real pioneers. So thank you for that. And you're a partner in the firm as well as the Chief Exec, I believe. So again, congratulations. So Tim will be joining us a little bit later. So coming back to me, basically what I wanted to do was to really just kind of talk through a little bit about what's going on in the forum, bring you up to speed, and then we'll get on with, we'll hear from John. So if you're not watching the videos from past shows every month, there are hundreds of them. Don't miss out, I think is the message there. Some of you will be aware, I send lots of emails, or lots of emails go under my name, probably is more accurate. But our annual Management Excellence Awards are currently open for submissions. And they're open until the 18th of October. I had somebody yesterday sent me an email saying, is there a limit on how many I can go in for? To which the answer is no. That was an Irish firm, in fact. So we do, it's not just UK. And what's important, I think, to me is that they are professional services Management Excellence Awards, supported by the FT and Harvard Business Review. And actually, at the end of the day, management excellence is something that, going back a few years, wasn't something that most firms thought was that important. Two fantastic managing partners on the show today both would see things possibly a bit differently, but do encourage those who are tasked to put in nominations that this is one that's actually worth entering for, whether you're a very, very large firm or a very small one. Because the one thing I do find about management is that size of firm and management excellence are not particularly correlated. You can have some amazing things from quite small firms, and you can have some complacency, put it that way, in the larger firms. We're big, therefore everybody comes to us. And as we'll hear from Ingrid, the brand can be really strong, but you still have to deliver your promises. Next area, just quickly briefing you on, is we've now launched online communities on the skills development platform. And the good news for everybody on the call today. There's two really. One is that they're open to everybody. And the second is I'm going to be creating an online community for you guys. So all the people who have registered for Retuning for this year, I'll be inviting you to join an online community so you can actually come across those who are also interested in this program and talk about some of the stuff we talk about. I don't think I could come up with the demographic because you guys come from all over the place and many countries, but it's wonderful to be able to offer you something else and there's no cost involved. So, and if you're really enterprising and you remember the forum, you can actually create your own private group. Very exciting. Invite people in, curate content, and generally sort of be in your own space. We've also launched a job board, initially with the marketing jobs, but we will extend it to professional services across the board in terms of the management team. And what's unusual about that is it's populated by just about every practice management job from thousands of sector firm websites. And that's not just law, it's law, accountancy, property, engineering, consultancy, you name it. And the reason we can do that is because we have a partnership with Vacancysoft, who are a firm who actually do capture all those jobs, minimal details, and then members can have their own jobs. I'm going to be doing a Retuning Your Marketing sister show. So anybody on the call today who's in the marketing arena may find that interesting. We're kicking off on the 15th of November, and that will be original research, MarTech update, because that's a really important area for a lot of marketing people. Some of the analytics from the job board, a panel session, all the usual things. And finally, again, this is more for the marketing people. Our annual marketing salary survey is currently live, and that's live until the 11th of October. So quite a lot going on in the forum at the moment. So if you're not linked into any of those things, hopefully you'll hear more about it when you join the online community. I would now like, if I may, to pass us to my co-host, Nigel, and he's going to be introducing John, and away we go. Over to you, sir.
Good morning, everyone. Richard, thank you for asking me to join you today. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to be here with all the managing partners today. I think the themes for the retuning session today around growth, innovation, and communication are front of mind for most of us, and really sort of interesting. So hopefully we'll brighten up today for everybody, because it is throwing it down where I am as well, Richard. So, in terms of our guests today that I'm going to hand over to, in terms of John, I mean, I think it's fascinating at the moment in terms of what's going on, because there is so much going on with sort of the US election looming. We've got new government in place, and there's a question over whether or not the honeymoon period is already starting to come to an end. We have a lot certainly in our space of projections and looking forward to what's going to happen on the 30th of October in the budget, and of course it's party conference season as well. So without anything sort of further, I'd like to sort of hand over to one of the regular guests for this forum, to John, to provide a bit of insight and his thoughts on what's going on at the moment. So over to you, John.
Thank you very much, Nigel. And yeah, it is incredibly busy at the moment. Interestingly, I was in Paris once a year. My agency network has a big meeting in Paris. That's where the HQ is. And over the last couple of years, the first thing my colleagues have said to me is, what the bloody hell is going on in the UK this week or this month? And it was refreshing to go to Paris this year and me to be able to ask my French and German colleagues what the bloody hell was going on at their end. And so I guess my first big observation is, look, this government is struggling a little bit at the moment, but there is a level of political stability in the UK that we have that is unusual for the UK in recent history, and is actually quite unusual in Europe actually at the moment. And I think that as a starting point is very helpful, because it reduces political risk in investment. And if we're talking about growth, governments often don't do lots and lots to help growth, but they can certainly get in the way of it. And I think removing politics as a barrier to growth is super important. So I'm just going to reflect on that actually, because it's very opposite. The big thing that has been going on in the business community in relation to politics, the big discussion has been, why is the government being so doomsterish and gloomsterish? It's spent a lot of the summer saying this is the worst fiscal inheritance since the war. There's no money. It's going to be cut. It's going to be tax. Things are going to get worse before they get better. But simultaneously, sending invitations out to global investors and big companies to attend their International Investment Summit, at the end of in October. And there was something very jarring about this message that the UK is open for business, come here, grow, employ people, but at the other end of it saying, this country's in a real bloody mess. And I think that tension has kind of got to breaking point over the last couple of weeks or so. And the government has realised that really it needs to start turning the optimism gauge up a little bit. And it is, to be fair. But I think the communications around it haven't been very deft. I think they were trying to run a George Osborne playbook, which is, prepare the society for austerity and cutbacks. But this is a Labour government, and I think the brand promise of a Labour government isn't austerity, it isn't cuts. It's actually, we're going to sort public services out and we're going to move forward. And actually, that was the Labour Party's election manifesto. It was a relatively optimistic prospectus. So what did we get out of conference? Well, the business is definitely a bit grumpy with the government at the moment. There's no doubt about it. They're a bit confused. They don't really think the government is getting the message. And the membership is a bit grumpy too, because they're thinking that Labour is, well, it's a bit all over the place in relation to the free gifts, Lord Ali. So these two things are going on at the same time. But we do have a budget coming, and I think you can focus on the messaging, the narrative, and the sort of SW1 sort of gossip. I think the budget is absolutely the first crucial test of this government, because this is hard policy that makes a difference, and an awful lot is riding on it. The credibility of the government is riding on it to a certain extent. So there are certain things that we think I think people are already beginning to price in. So inheritance tax changes to make that regime less generous. Capital gains tax regime is probably going to be made less generous. The non-dom regime, which was going to be heavily restricted, apparently is now under review, because we've seen reports from particularly wealth managers that internationally mobile capital is already moving. So I think they're having second thoughts on that. But there is one absolutely massive change, which I think dwarfs everything else in this budget, and that's if Rachel Reeves decides to rewrite the fiscal rules. Because at the moment, the spending envelope, as they call it, of the government is constrained by certain rules. And what that has done is massively restrict the amount of money that the government can use to invest. And what do we know about the UK economy? It is short on investment. The capital stock of this country has been run down, and the government doesn't have the financial firepower to turn it around. If you rewrite the fiscal rules to look at the balance sheet, the government balance sheet, differently, suddenly you have potentially billions and billions of pounds that could be spent on infrastructure, on green energy, on funding GB Energy, on funding the National Wealth Fund. And that is what begins to unlock some of the ambitions that this government has. So I think that's the one change you need to look at very carefully, because governments will increase tax rates at the margin on certain things, and people will be upset about it. But it's not often that a government can make a single transformative move in a budget, and this is one of them. And that could also have an impact in this parliament as well. This is the other issue with long-term investment, that the effects aren't always felt within the envelope or within the timescale of one parliament. I think Labour really need to show progress on some of these issues or some of these things inside this parliament if they're going to have a decent and credible platform for the next general election. I don't want to talk about it, but it comes around quickly enough. So that's the budget. There is also another few bits and pieces that are coming that are significant to the professional services sector. We saw at conference that the government is committing to bringing forward its workers' rights reform package. That will go into Parliament in October, inside the 100 days that they committed. Key change here is on the probationary period, which will come down from 2 years to probably 6 months. That's the kind of deal that Angela Rayner and Johnny Reynolds, the business secretary, seem to have cut, that 6 months will be the maximum probation period. I think for some of us who are employers, that is a little bit of a concern, that you you might want a bit longer. But the view that Labour have is that by bringing it down, it will actually make the labour market less rigid and more mobile, because people will have to make decisions earlier on in employment relationships. The other thing that I will be looking at is how the right to switch off rules are constructed, because in my business we don't really, I mean, we sleep obviously, but I would expect my team to be looking at their phones, first thing in the morning and in the evening. Sometimes crises happen, and our clients at times expect us to be responsive. So I will be looking at that. And then we've also got industrial strategy, which Richard alluded to in the warm-up to this discussion. The industrial strategies, I should say, will be coming, I think, sometime in after the International Investment Summit in October. And we're also getting a reform of the apprenticeship levy as well. There's quite a lot going on. So I will leave it there for the government. Just on the Conservatives, they're going to their conference this weekend. Their leadership process is still underway. It's quite a long, drawn-out process. They've got 4 candidates left. They will whittle that down to 2. That's probably going to be Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick. And that will then go to a member ballot, and the new leader of the Tory party will be announced on the 2nd of November. So from the 2nd of November, you will have a functioning opposition with a leadership. It was interesting. I was talking to a Tory MP last week, young guy, only just elected. And he said that the challenge that the Conservative Party in opposition has at the moment is there just aren't that many of them. And it's hard to be an opposition when you've only got 120 odd MPs, because you need to have a shadow front bench, you need to staff select committees, you need to do legislative scrutiny. So his sense was that the party would have to really focus in on a narrower number of issues and not try and chase every issue, and focus in on what they think is important. So that's it for the UK. Just on the US, my US colleagues absolutely still will not be drawn on making any predictions about this election. Like they're allergic to it. I push them all the time, and they just say we don't know. The margins will be very fine in certain districts, and the one thing that they will say is that there's a decent chance of litigation after the election, because you could have pretty tight votes that end up in the courts deciding what happens in what then goes up to the Electoral College. That said, H Advisors is running 2 webinars. I will be running that with my colleagues in Washington DC. One in October as a preview, and one after the election result is in November. So Richard, what I'll do is I will share that webinar invitation to you, and maybe you could share that with the forum as well for anybody that wanted to join. So I will leave it there, if that's okay.
Thank you, John. Yes, I will be very happy to share. Your content is always amazing, so very happy to share with anything that comes along. Right, it's now my great pleasure to introduce you to Ingrid Brown, who I mentioned earlier is the principal of design and communications consultancy Brightspace. And they did an interesting survey a few months ago, as I mentioned, looking at value proposition. I won't steal her thunder, so I will, if I may, pass over to Ingrid. And I know she's going to be showing us a few slides, which is great. And over to you.
Great, thank you, Richard. Yeah, really good to be here today. I am going to share some slides because we're just going to share some top-level results. I promise I will not bore anybody with PowerPoint. I'll make it as succinct as I can, but I hope you will find it quite interesting. So let's see, am I all there, sharing everything good? So where we start really is, and I think the connection to today's theme around growth is quite relevant, because we really do feel as a consultancy and advisory firm, we work with firms to help them really communicate their value, specifically around the narrative that they use to go to market with. So I think in today's world, I think, we'd all agree that it's important to connect, with meaning to the people that matter to you. So what we did earlier this year is when the sort of top 50 law, the results came out of the top 50 top accountancy and law firms. We decided to take a look at them, and we asked one simple question, which is really, how well are these firms communicating their value? And is that actually impacting on their growth? So when, just to go back to when we do look at a narrative, we do always start with looking at purpose and vision, because clearly for us, a vision is about communicating your company's strategy. It should be probably more internally focused, so you'll see the results probably reflect that. But specifically starting out with purpose for us has always been a really strong foundation for your narrative. So by looking across the available information that we could access, obviously externally through your comms, we looked across websites, annual reviews, and increasingly now I'm quite happy to see more and more transparency reports as well that are available on firms' websites. And we really did look at how well these companies communicate across 5 distinct value areas. So you'll see in there, naturally going to be just, it's around your products and services. It's around, for some companies, particularly if they're listed, financials. So a lot of your corporate clients will be reporting on financials, obviously. And then you can see you've got ESG as well. So it's just how well you're generating value across those 3 as well. And then, literally just examining and looking at the value you're creating, and actually, more importantly, really asking the question of why does it actually matter to the stakeholders that you need to influence. So what we discovered was on a positive note. Even though I've titled this slide like a lack of purpose, the last time we did this study in 21, these figures were like 19 and 21%. So there's been a real effort for firms to articulate or go through the exercise of having a purpose. So that's positive to see. However, when we went and really interrogated and looked at these purpose statements, it was only half of those that really genuinely are doing it well, where it felt very authentic and real. So these are examples of ones that I feel are quite grandiose. They're very lofty statements for, I feel, a law firm or an accounting firm to claim. I mean, I think even just the one, helping your future take off, for me could be a recruitment consultancy. And I just really do wonder sometimes how can a firm genuinely, achieve some of these purposes? If that is their leading principle as a business, it is quite lofty, and does it actually sound authentic and achievable? So the other thing then to notice, vision doesn't come up so high, but that, as I mentioned earlier, is not so much of an issue, because I think it should be an internally focused communication that should be aligned to values. Quite often the 2 aren't aligned. And the other thing that I've seen is sometimes vision and purpose there was confusion between what they actually are. So what was really positive to see is clearly ESG is being well communicated, and we're seeing a really good evidence of clearly outlined agendas with clear KPIs set out, and so it just feels less like the old day CSR. It's less about just what you do for the community. There are clear strategies in place. I suspect also because there is pressure now, because being in the value chain of your corporate clients, you also need to have this in place. And then I think when we looked at the overarching kind of ability to really have a joined up, cohesive narrative that really talks about value and integrates it through the whole of your comms, there really wasn't that very many firms that actually did it well. I mean, I think this sort of equates to something like, I've written down like 3 and 6 firms. It's not really great. So what does that actually tell us? I think there is generally some confusion around purpose and what it really means. And I just wonder whether in trying, we're still failing. So what can we really do, and what can how can purpose work for professional services firms? And I guess what we would like to do is to kind of like really look at the stakeholders you need to speak to first, look at how they are now all converging, and how what we then do is map across those value pillars that we talked about and map it across to the value. So when we work with clients, we'll say, okay, really drill down across these value areas what you do deliver to each of those stakeholder groups that you serve, and then really question why and evidence it. It needs to be relevant. It needs to be evidenced. It can't be just grandiose statements. And I think where you will see in the public listed companies that we often work with as well, they have to be very transparent now about all of this, and they do a better job because they have to report in that way. They need to be able to report strategic visions and show 3 to 5 year plans of what they're doing. So I think we can learn a lot from our own clients, and I think because we work with those clients as well, I think for us it's easy for us to translate this to professional services firms that we work with. So the question as well is, when we go through this exercise, it's really clear when we map the value that you believe that you deliver. And what drops out from this is we get a really clear business value proposition for all of what you do. And for some companies that might actually be purpose. The next slide will show you that. But the other thing it does is it brings out a really clear customer value proposition. It brings out an employee value proposition, which is key. And then for anyone who has shareholders or investors, you will get your investor value proposition, because it will drop out of the financials and the governance that in those 5 pillars. So, really, I guess our question is, are you also genuinely purpose-led or a value-driven organization? And when you look at this slide, when we map, for example, what the index is or the value that you have across those 5, if you're very high in societal giving in what you do as a business, you are more likely to be more purpose driven. I mean, for example, I'm working with a firm at the moment, and they are legal aid, so they are very, very purpose driven, and the people that work for them are choosing to work for that firm. They're probably choosing to work on lower pay because that's they want to be in mission-led companies. So that really, is kind of like a very sort of a top level summary of the findings that we've got. We've got a much bigger report, obviously, that we can share, but I just feel like it's, our main takeaways, I guess, are just really think about how purpose-led you really are. And if you're not, and you're not clear, maybe don't go out with a grandiose purpose statement. Think more about your value proposition and that business value proposition, and just keep it really simple, be authentic, and more importantly, be relevant. So I think in a nutshell, and I'm hoping, Richard, that I've been very good in keeping to my time, that is a summary, I guess, of what we wanted to communicate today.
Fantastic. And if you just want to take your slides out, that would be great.
Yes, of course.
Thank you very much. Okay, so one of the our panelists today is Tim Nash. And I'll just I'll just tell you a little bit about Tim if you haven't met him. Tim is the chief exec, as I mentioned, of Edwin Crowe. Edwin Crowe is one of the early B Corps. Purpose is absolutely what drives B Corps. So apart from welcoming you to the panel, if I may ask the first question, and then Nigel will then ask the second, how do you actually make clear who your stakeholders are? You can have a purpose, but how do you make sure it's relevant to all those different stakeholders? Over to you, sir.
Gosh, well, thanks, Richard, and thanks, Ingrid. That was a really interesting analysis. And actually, I'm probably going to do an advert for B Corp now. But B Corp is ties up all of those things. I think B Corp pretty much maps into all the areas that you highlighted there. And the really interesting thing about B Corp is it's the right thing to do anyway. And as a professional services firm, we're not particularly polluting, I hope. And so, you know, we tend to treat our workers pretty well. So actually, you know, a lot of the things that B Corps do, you know, professionals, you know, map very well with professional services. So that allows you to really connect with the things that B Corp look for, and really get with the program. So a lot of the things that we were doing were just not, you know, they were the right thing to do, but there was no recognition for it. So B Corp provided that, and really provides a lot of energy, and is a great message to give out to our clients, our suppliers, our other stakeholders, our employees, to really motivate them. But you have to do it genuinely. I think is the key thing, because you can. It's pretty easy to spot a fraud, I think, in that area.
Tim, that's really fascinating. Can I just follow up on one thing, and it's just picking up on Ingrid's presentation, because I think Ingrid sort of kept it fairly simple in terms of identifying the stakeholders as clients or customers, employees, investors, humankind. I think with professional services, do we try and overcomplicate how many stakeholders we seem to have? Because I could instantly sort of throw into the mix sort of suppliers, regulation, and government, and various other people. Do we try and overcomplicate those key stakeholders we have?
I would say not. I think it is worth putting a bit of thought into who the stakeholders are. I mean, the regulator, the government. You know, the government's a stakeholder because, you know, if you're not paying your tax, then, you know, and we've seen collapses of professional services firms because of that. You know, they're a stakeholder. I mean, if you want to, you can really push out the envelope. It's not only your partners who are obviously stakeholders, your employees who are a slightly different class, but their families. There are a lot of people that depend on the profits that are generated by a firm, and it's worthwhile recognizing that, because you can be just simply a profit-making organization for the partners, and, you know, that at the start. But it's so much more than that, and it's so enriching being involved in an organization that recognizes its place in society, and the force that it can be, and the influence it can have on so many more than just a partnership.
Perhaps I can come in here. Ingrid, just sort of thinking about, if you like, I can see that Tim's almost, I won't say it's at the end of the road because it doesn't quite work that way, but Tim has clearly taken the firm in his 16 years through a process where they feel confident that they are at least addressing the issues in a sensible way. Where do people start? I mean, saying you start with your purpose is great, but it doesn't change very much. So how do, as a sort of managing partner, chief exec, you feel it's important that you should be doing the right thing? I'll use that terminology without trying to cause offense. Where would you start in your experience as somebody who works with firms who are going through that process?
Well, normally what we would do is literally we do speak to their stakeholders. So it starts off by actually asking clients, looking across the whole value chain, in fact. So we will speak to suppliers, to employees. So there's quite a lot of stakeholder engagement that we carry out, so that we get this 360 view back into the company, because I think quite often purpose is created internally, and it becomes quite, you know, what's the word, like, it becomes a bit more internally driven of what you want, not necessarily what you're actually delivering. So we will work with you internally, but then we will validate it externally as well. So it is about getting that 360 and auditing what your perception is. And the other thing to note, a lot of people will invest in what is good. We always do invest in client insights, in what service we're giving, but we should also keep an eye on your positioning and also your perception of what people really do think, and is it matching what you believe as well. We see a disconnect quite often in the two.
John, if I may quickly, you have you're in a different world. You're, apart from being a brilliant political analyst, you're also managing director of your own business. It has its own stakeholders. Do they map broadly with the ones we've talked about, or do you find yourself talking to focus to a different set?
They're exactly the same. Yeah.
Okay.
I guess we would interact with government in a different way, because not only are they stakeholders in the sense that they set the rules of the game by which we operate, but part of our business is helping our clients speak to government. So there's for us, I would say it's an even more important stakeholder. So I guess the balance of who's more important in that list of stakeholders is different, but the audiences are exactly the same.
And maybe ask Nigel about your own firm. I mean, is B Corp something that you would? You don't have to answer this, obviously, but is this something that you think might work in the accountancy world as much as in the law world? I know there are a few firms that have gone down that route.
Yeah, I think possibly, actually, Richard. It's a really good observation. I sort of share a lot of sort of Tim's observations, really, that I think professional service firms, in terms of the key things that underpin us as people, businesses focused on client service, are sort of a lot of the things that align with B Corp are common with a lot of professional service firms, and things that we actually importantly sort of aspire to do. I had a question though, Richard, for Ingrid, and that was, Ingrid, I really liked what you've outlined in terms of, purpose, be simple, be true, be authentic. How do you get that balance? Because obviously with a purpose statement, you want to be you want to have the art of succinct without overcomplicating things. But then how do you achieve that without it appearing the grandiose statement?
Well, it would usually be accompanied by a narrative anyway. So we would start your narrative by, when we roll it back to you, we would actually start off with a fundamental truth of where you actually do exist and who you serve and what you're there to actually really do. So that can't be argued with, that is where you. And then I think it will be looking at really drilling down to where that value is, what the stakeholders have said. And we will probably, so you might be a firm that's more towards governance. You might be more financial. You might be more towards finance, or society. So it's going to have a leaning to an area where you're offering the best value. And every firm is different. So we will keep going and keep going. You might be more of an enabling partner for your clients. It might be that you have got innovation or a process. So sometimes it can be the how you deliver your services, not necessarily your why, which I think can confuse people. So it is about drilling it down, getting that narrative, working it in with your vision and your values as well. And it just feels really joined up, and it feels like you've done the work and you've made it authentic. We get the four common values that are used across all professional services. I'm still seeing, and I saw them 10 years ago, are still trust, excellence, integrity, and collaboration. There's just things that we're doing and we're ticking boxes maybe a little bit too much. But I think, just to talk B Corp, I think is brilliant, because for me, that's about being a really responsible business. I think that's demonstrating that you can be trusted and that you are putting in that effort to be a responsible business. So I'm a big favourite, and it doesn't necessarily have to mean you're purpose driven, by the way. To me, it's fundamentally that you care enough to go through that process, because you do have to report and you have to be transparent. So, yeah.
Just to add to that answer, Ingrid, it is a huge challenge to make sure that the experience of the various stakeholders matches the promise.
Yes.
And that's the challenge you set yourself.
Yes.
And just, Tim, if I may, let's explore into the world that's perhaps less bouncy and wonderful and comfortable. In other words, how you deal with people who perhaps say one thing but then don't deliver, but are your top fee earner, or all the other things that they think are important. How do you manage that as the CEO?
Gosh, well, that's probably the subject of episode 98 or more. It's a constant challenge, because quite often that individual is, will be one of the key individuals bringing in income. So you have to. There's a whole. I mean, that's a whole episode. You have to encourage. You have to escalate. But ultimately, you can't have an individual stepping outside of the norms that you've established. So you have to work very, very hard and try and get that get that conformity, because otherwise you're not sort of walking the walk, are you?
I think I
No,
would agree. Sorry,
sorry,
Richard.
no, I was going to say, I remember looking at some of the larger accountancy firms. I won't name names, it's not fair, but some of them I would describe as we all set out as farmers and we go into our fields at the beginning of the season, we plant what we can, and we all come back at the end of the season and we either have a celebration or a wake. And at the other extreme, you'll have the firm that says, well, if it's not in the strategy, we don't do it. So where do you think one should position oneself on that spectrum?
Is that a question to me?
Well, either of you, I think, because both of you are leading professional firms. I mean, it's.
I'm happy to jump in on that one. I actually think it's sort of, it goes back to, I think, where Ingrid was sort of saying about being sort of, having clear values, being purpose led, actually, and knowing what you represent, and then picking up on Tim's point. I was just going to sort of add that actually it is important more so than ever, if we're going to continue to sort of have this growth, innovation, and communication agenda, to be able to ensure as professional service firms for the future, actually we are all aligned on our values, what we represent, what we're trying to do, what we're trying to achieve, and actually, the days of people being able to go outside those margins, I think, are going to become less and less, especially with the sustainability agenda.
Wonderful. And John, you again probably have the same issues, I suspect.
We do. I was just thinking about this question of values and purpose in an industry that's on the verge of being disrupted, which I think mine is. Like, I think corporate communications, advertising, media is, we don't quite know how yet, but is on the verge of being disrupted by the application of artificial intelligence. And we're all desperately working out how we deploy it. But if I think about the identity of my firm, which is, I've been with it for 18 years and started as a junior and worked up, that career journey, which is part of our kind of identity. A lot of the senior management team have been at the firm for 10 years or more. That looks very different in a world where we're not necessarily recruiting account execs or juniors in the same way and giving them a multiple year career. So I think that it's something that I don't have an answer, but it's something that we're wrestling with. And I think going back to that process of like what your values are and what you're about is, I think it's in some ways it's probably changed. It's impacted by that external disruption.
Well, I suspect the agenda changes, but maybe the questions stay the same. Would you agree with that, Ingrid?
I would, and I think it's about, I think for me, purpose attracts, but actually doing purposeful work is, I think, what the younger generation are looking. They want to just know that the work they're doing is valued and that their contribution is valued. So it's probably sometimes more about recognition. So yes, attract them by being clear about what you're there to do and what you really want to do as a firm. But I think it is important. I feel to recognize that they're adding to that and creating that value collectively with you.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to move to gallery mode for the final minute. And as usual, I'm going to be asking each of the panelists, what's the one thing that you've heard today that has been new, interesting, innovative, has inspired you? Or perhaps there wasn't anything, but start off with Tim, if I may. What have you heard today that really interested you?
I think I think the thing that really interested me is got to be the US election, because I think so much depends on that geopolitically, but that will filter down and will colour a lot of what goes on in the next 4 or 5 years.
Well, that's not the response we normally get, so that's great. And we don't have an answer on that one either. Over to you, Nigel. What's your one takeaway?
Yeah, I was really inspired by some of the findings that Ingrid had, and I think the real challenge for everyone on this call, probably looking at those interesting statistics that were put up from the research, is that we've got to be careful we don't just assume we're one of the ones in the positive box, and actually there's a bit of challenge and reflection in the messages that have come out there for all of us, I think. So I think that's really helpful.
It's the danger of groupthink, they call that sometimes, don't they? So, Ingrid, what's your takeaway from today?
Well, I love, obviously, John and I like both in corporate communications, but I love doomerish and gloomerish that he used. I do think, yeah, that brand promise, you know, of the Labour Party, and then to go to look for investment against that doom and gloom. Yeah, well, I thought that was really, really insightful and good observation.
So over to you, John, your final thought for today.
Thank you. I thought it was a really interesting discussion as ever. And I thought, Ingrid, your presentation was really thought-provoking, because I think these are some of the questions my agency is like wrestling with at the moment. So maybe a bit of a rocket there for us, Ingrid. Thank you.
Well, it's hard to detach yourself from the day job sometimes, I suspect, and sadly that's the point at which I'm going to say over that we're going to wish you all a great day job. But it's Friday, so you're probably able to do it from home, I suspect, most people. But anyway, we'll be back in a month's time with John as usual, and another co-host and another panelist. So, and another survey. We'll be doing the sector trends, and is the growth that was projected 3 months ago still holding up? It'll be quite interesting to find out. They're currently being the panel are completing at the moment. I'm insisting on the usual 100% response, which is nobody believes is possible, but we seem to be able to get every time. And then if people don't do the 100%, they feel they're letting the side down, and that's what it's all about. And as I mentioned earlier, I will be inviting everybody who's on this call, and indeed anybody who has signed up for Retuning 2024 to join this online community that we're creating. And I'll shortly be going out with an invitation to sign up for, register for online for the Retuning Your Firm 2025, because that way we can continue. And in January, we will have our 100th episode, which is pretty amazing. So something to celebrate, I suspect. But thank you all today. Thank you, Nigel, for being an excellent co-host. Thank you for Tim for sharing. Ingrid, thank you for inspiring us. Thank you for John for keeping our feet on the ground with the realities of this world. And from me, just to say, have a wonderful day, and we'll see you all soon. Bye for now.